Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Fadia Aninda Rizqi. My student number is 49. I will explain about research methods for IELLE with examples. This chapter outlines the feature, relative strength, and weakness of the research methods used to study literature in language education using sample studies. Ethnographic and qualitative literature studies in language education are recommended because student perspectives on IELLE are still neglected. Therefore, this chapter progresses broadly from more controlled and experimental methods to more qualitative, naturalistic, and action research-oriented methods, which are more likely to be engaged and more practicable for teachers who have access to relevant situations. The research approach chosen will tend to use certain methods rather than other. Cognitive interests usually require a think out loud control rather than a questionnaire. For example, a questionnaire in turn would be more suitable for surveys to obtain general information about a larger population. Methods of collection data: think out loud or free writing protocol, diary journal, keepsakes, interviews, dictionary, observation, field notes, individual reading behavior, controlled experiments, case study, and then triangulation of some of the above. Next, experimental research. Experimental research, which is strictly understood, makes it difficult for most of us to carry out ordinary tasks because of the need for tight control. Usually, experimental purity is purchased at the expense of ecological validity, for which qualitative research places a high premium. Example of experimental research with summary, destination, methodology, and then result, comment, and further research. For the next protocol, for the most part, the research methodology described with the example in this chapter is qualitative in nature. An important exception or particular exception is the use of verbal protocols, things out loud or thoughts, or sometimes other less direct methods to investigate reading process and individual strategies. The protocol is a transcript for speech that shows what information was considered in solving a problem, not direct record of what has been done and how, which is an internal cognitive process. A particular issue that research should clarify with regard to allocation of second language learners protocol is the language in which the protocol will be implemented, and whether, for example, bilingual analysis will be required to count and interpret data. The basic rule should be the ease and comfort of the subject and the language problems, not to distract from direct thinking aloud. Variations such as the transcript of the peers of student discussing literary text are a deviation from a pure protocol approach, because peers will interact with each other and influence with each other as much as interaction with the text. Also note the interaction. Also note the transcript may need to include silence or possible time, pause or hesitation, or other aspects of nonverbal communication such as gestures, facial expression, postures, or etc. So far as revealing about what happened during read, the choice of coding for analyzing the transcript will be determined by the interest of the research, influenced by knowledge of the research area and ex- expectation expectation based on experience. Encoding is the first step towards generalization, but must also try to respect the specification of the transcript being studied. Participle for sound protocol research. First, intervention timing between mental surgery reporting is important to and should be minimized as much as possible. Number two, verbalization plays additionally cognitive demand on mental processing that required attention to achieve insightful result. Number three, verbal reporting of mental process should avoid the usual social convention of taking to a person. There is number four. There is a lot of information in a retrospective report apart from the word themselves. Number five, automated process verbal report not possible. Number six, research should be based on models of mental process that allows prediction about how mental operation will be organized under various conditions. To ensure that the possible distorting effects of methodology are kept to a minimum, strict producers are recommended, although they are not difficult to follow once a researcher is aware of them. To repeat some of a key point in Brown and Rogers. First, there should be minimum of intervention from a research after the task in the progress. Second, there always seems to be some benefit from practicing these utterance a lot on other material. Number three, protocols. Protocols must be passed and transcript. And the last, clear and unambiguous instruction and are urgently needed in experimental research of this kind.
Now I'll explain to you about survey research and case studies. Survey research. Survey research will be used to find out about relatively factual information about a situation. It may be termed descriptive, though we should always be cautious about claims, implicit or explicit, to have evaded interpretive work. Surveys in language and education have often looked at attitude and motivation. Surveys can inform policy making and planning decisions, allocation of resources including time and money, and to inform everyday teaching decisions. Typically, such research will involve collection and study of documents such as timetables, syllabus statements, and reading lists. Interviews with participants and stakeholders such as students, teachers, heads of colleges, or education ministry officials. The design, administration, and processing of questionnaires can be advanced arts, but for initial practical purpose, teachers could consider using critical adaptation of relevant published work with full and proper acknowledgement. The document analysis, interviews, and questionnaire results can be triangulated to give a fuller picture of the situation under study. Then, case studies. Case studies examine a bounded phenomenon in depth and in a holistic manner. Bounded means a single individual or limited group of individuals, a classroom, a single national curriculum, etc. Case studies can be useful for longitudinal research. Case studies have long been used in second language acquisitions to study areas such as syntax or vocabulary development, with names such as WES, well known to students of language acquisition courses. Case studies are qualitative in that they are typically exploratory, seeking patterns and themes which emerge rather than seeking to test precise a priori hypotheses. Strengths and weaknesses of case studies. Strengths. First, the results are more easily understood by a wide audience. Second, they are immediately intelligible. Third, they catch unique features that may otherwise be lost in larger scale data. These unique features might hold the key to understanding the situation. Fourth, they are strong on reality. Fifth, they provide insights into similar situations and cases, thereby assisting interpretation of other similar cases. Sixth, they can be undertaken by a single researcher without needing a full research team. Seventh, they can embrace and build in unanticipated events and uncontrolled variables. Weaknesses. First, the result may not be generalizable except where other readers or researchers see their application. Second, they are not easily open to cross-checking, hence they may be selective, biased, personal, and subjective. Third, they are prone to problems of observer bias despite attempts made to address reflexivity. Positive feature of a case study. First, it shows what features are possible and need to be taken account of in any generalization. Second, it may be used to refute a generalization as only one case is necessary for this purpose. And the last, it may be used search of hypotheses. A survey might also be represented as a case study to the extent that it's related to wider or more theoretical issue. A more qualitative case study, however, will tend to move towards the ethnographic and will typically deal with a single classroom, perhaps through a year's study, a teacher, or an individual learner, as a whole person trying to learn a new language. What are needed now are case studies of varying literature in language education situations, both to understand and appreciate that variety, but also to look for possible emerging patterns in how literature is used, and what may be gained or lost by using it. Norton and van der Heyden offer an example of a case study which very much attempts to take a student perspective on literature.
These findings do not necessarily translate directly into teaching strategies. It is notable that part of the appeal of the comics is their borderline of acceptability status. Norton and van der Heyden also note that traditional ideologies of literacy are already being internalized by the students who often did not feel they should be allowed to read such texts during school hours, that difficult reading is good reading. Nevertheless, the authors point out that Mangubay and IELLE also observed the popularity of comic in their extensive reading program on Fiji. A common cry of teachers globally is the decline of reading among their students, but what scholars such as Kress have claimed is that it's not so much that less is being read, but rather that new kits of texts are now being read in different ways by new generation of readers. Aresti comic would be an example of this. The language of the Aresti comic is not simple on any conventional linguistic measurement, and the evident enjoyment of jokes and puns point to real cognitive and linguistic sophistication on the part of these readers. They are also teaching their teachers how extensive reading might work. With respect to question of effect, it should also be noted that students just like this regularly complain that literature is too serious. Their teachers have imbibed an ideology of literature that tells us tragedy is more worthwhile than comedy, that life is a serious matter, and so on. I have often, as a teacher, been asked if there are no funny stories in English. Reader response claims to address issues of enjoyment and popular literature and other new media just address these issues. And popular literature and other new media may just address these issues. We could add that this is typical case study research in the sense that it is suggestive for further work and brings new aspects of the literary to the attention of many of us, but is in no sense definitive. The case is nevertheless a suggestive one, and deserves follow-up as the authors themselves promise in part. With research, for example, into the use of comics, the field of new literacies, including the uses by young people of fanzines, magazines, and so on, to other manifestations of popular culture such as the soap opera stories of TV and popular press. At the time of writing, TV shows like The Simpsons or Friends could be revealing art forms to investigate with learners. Another field suggested by Kress' work would be investigation of new literacy practice and multimodality. Literature, in short, needs ever broader understandings from educators if they are to keep up with their students and to support their students in preparation for the literacy demands and to support their students in preparation for the literacy demands of modern life. Ethnographic study, for many there will be no strict divide between case study research and ethnography, although it might be argued that ethnography is distinguished by features such as extended participation in the research site, reflexivity, and the other writing compulsion to understand and report faithfully participant understanding of many events. Even in the world are seen as necessarily social events, and social events come about largely through linguistic and other communication interaction. The point of this study was that Kwan's expectations were as strange to the Chinese student as they were to him. Both parties needed to realize the cultural nature of literacy, hear what constitutes competence in writing about literature. Because of this cultural perspective, the work of Bakhtin and Rizqi once again becomes relevant. The notion of learning as appropriation of literature and language as discourse that literature and language learning take place always necessarily in differing and often hostile of contradictory social contexts. Pennycook's critical applied linguistics refers to needs to investigate resistance and appropriation in post-colonial contexts, which necessarily foreground a relative and historical understanding of language use. Themes of appropriation, a problematic side for resistance rather than reproduction, which will be difficult for this young woman to find elsewhere. Zubair reports a feminist critical pedagogical attempt. Zubair report a feminist critical pedagogical attempt to open the research literature classroom to less conventional but arguably more relevant reading of the English classic through which her student could explore their identities and aspirations. Researchers comment in competing views regarding women's and men's roles emerge, where young women and women are debating, challenging, redefining the societal. Where young men and women are debating, challenging, redefining the societal norms and expectations, a renegotiation of gender-specific norms of behavior is underway in this entire discourse. And the role of the teacher is that of a moderator. We do not need to clone ourselves, but to enable our students to think and reflect on their social worlds through a reading of text. Reading and writing should lead to reflection and creative thinking, promoting a classroom culture of questioning and contesting the existing power dynamics in our everyday discourses. Zubair, in some ways, a follow-up study, notes an uneasiness and suspicious of English as a colonial language and literature, which nevertheless seems to allow young Pakistani women some SPB needs to discuss and reflect on their identities, position in society and aspiration, but can be seen as being used to think and talk through new, rather unconventional but undoubtedly still contradictory position. The author observed that as the students progress through their English education, they experiment with looks, hair, slimming, dress, makeup, and so on in ways which confirm that they are experimenting and thinking about their identities, as they partly do through their English studies. In some ways, this confirms the worst fears of protective and conservative families and guardians, but Zubair argues that this is not an uncritical assimilation of values or westernization going on. General consideration. This chapter aims to help readers design and implement their own research project in IELLE. The basic orientation assumed is that of action research as outlined at the beginning of Part 3, a teacher-researcher in the AR perspective, which is to understand better in order to transform an existing, less than satisfactory situation in collaboration with other participants, and will then reflect on the effect of the transformation in order to go on improving practice in the interest of all participants. Notes, diagrams, and doodles can gradually build up to research diaries, proposals, and research writing. Quote 8.1. Getting started, keep a small notebook or piece of paper handy and jot down anything that occurs to you as interesting about your teaching. Question, puzzles, insights, abandonments, and grumbles. Basic step 4. Action research. Step 1. Establish a purpose and decide on a topic. Step 2. Pose a specific question. Step 3. Anticipate outcome. Step 4. Specify the type of data to collect. Step 5. Determine ways to collect data. Step 6. Consider issues related to time. Step 7. Collect data systematically. Step 8. Examine and analyze data. Step
9. Reflect on results. Step 10. Generate practical solution. Step 11. Experiment with solution. Step 12. Share insight with colleagues. Initial formulation of a problem of or research question are very likely to be imperfect and need revision. But until you have something in writing, you can start to revise and improve on it. A common problem for new researchers, as for many writers, is to expect perfection and to become discouraged at a stage when the best that can be hoped for is a rough start.
General consideration. This chapter aims to help readers design and implement their own research project in IELLE or literature in language education. Traditionally, it was said that qualitative research was an orientation essentially unteachable, learned by experience and apprenticeship only. The basic step for action research. Step 1. Establish a purpose and decide of a topic. Step 2. Pose a specific question. Step 3. Anticipate outcome. Step 4. Specify the type of data to collect. And step 5. Determine ways to collect data. And step 6. Consider issue related to time. Step 7. Collect data systematically. Step 8. Examine and analyze data. Step 9. Reflect and resolve. Step 10. Generate practical solution. Step 11. Experience with solution. And step 12. Share insight with colleagues. Likely source of information or data informing qualitative action research will be observation, interview, and analysis of text and documents. Number 1. Observative. Observing a literature lesson raises many useful teaching questions. Designed to ensure a more pragmatically successful lesson, which obviously seen also as legitimate research question in the sense that they conclude to better understanding of what might be going on in literature lesson. Key feature for observation. 1. Setting is space, object, and people, actors, relationship, interaction, and feelings. And system, formal and informal. And last, behavior, times, routines, process, and event. Number 2 is interview. Remember that most interview needs to talk less and listen more. The primary object of the exercise to deepen your understanding of the interviews is. Number 3, analysis of text and documents. You may be analyzing written documents, spoken interaction, and non-linguistic data. And you need to keep careful records, analyze as you go along, and remember that to analyzer. Some possible project for literature in IELLE. There follow some suggestions for projects which would be of wider interest to the IELLE research community, together with ideas for methods and analyze. Of course, as already argued, in the first instance action research will not necessarily assume generalizability of findings, but will concentrate on specific of situation, which may well also lead to questions like this being motivated in the light of more local concerns. A further key issue that healing reminds us all of are the issue of research needs for a project, especially that most previous and scale of research for most time. Project topic 1. Syllabus, testing or assessment. Number 2. A literature lesson. 3. Case study or culture. 4. Reading literature in SL. 5. Attitude to literature. And number 6. Literature as a social practice. And how to collect data. Number 1. Textual analysis and document. Number 2. Observation. Number 3. Observation, interview and journals. Number 4. Protocol study. Number 5. Questionnaire and interview. And number 6. Ethnography.
Anticipated outcome. Results to be reported in terms of vocabulary and topic areas, but could also cover syntax, style, or others, not including function or discussing arguing a point, making concession, appealing to written evidence, or quoting come quickly to mind as likely functions learned by literature readers in educational context. Reading skills might cover areas as above, but the investigator will need to be clear which aspects or levels of language are of primary interest for the investigation. And next, how to collect data. Textual analysis of documents can be assessed increasingly easily by corpus studies, especially to establish questions concerning vocabulary to be found in the text to be studied. And next, data collection. It will be easy to begin at least close to home with your own students and teaching situation where issues of confidentiality and the like are easier to deal. And the next is analysis. Analysis can be quantitative or as with corpus-based investigation, but also qualitative or discourse analysis of an official education document, for example. And next is time allocation. Reading and analyzing conscientiously and systematically take time, of course. But remember also to allow an equal amount of time to writing up the analysis. And the next is research needed. Corpus-based investigation will obviously necessitate hardware, software, and other appropriate knowledge and research. A library database must well be a relevant consideration. The next is project 2 is observation of a literature lesson. Number 1 is purpose. You may wish to focus on a particular person or group in the classroom, a type of activity or stage of a lesson. If you know what you are looking for, prepare notes beforehand or an observation schedule to be sure you concentrate on the object of observation. And the next is key question. Okay, number 1, this key question is what interactions occur around literary text in class? And number 2, it is the case in the class you are observing. Number 3, could alternative interaction patterns be encouraged? Number 4, how far do they engage with the language of the text and to what extent are they just responding to a text as springboard? And next, anticipated outcome. If the class seems to be proceeding more smoothly, again this may not be without its own problems, but the quality and extent of studies contribution and how these are facilitated may be a useful focus. And then how to collect data. Teach a colleague class in exchange for her teaching yours or video or tab your own class. If you are lucky and diplomatic, it may be possible to attend other classes. And then data collection. Record the observation is possible because of the weakness of human memory and of selective attention. The next analysis. Analysis can be very systematic, even quantitative, and there is certainly a value, for example, in timing contributions of different participants or counting the number of contributions of different contributors, perhaps according to categories. And then time allocation. Research analysis to one or two classes to keep the project manageable. And then research needed. Recording equipment, access to classes, goodwill of those to be observed, including formal permission in some cases. And then project 3 is case study. In an individual reader or readers reading the same text or text across time. Number 1 is purpose. A good case study will inspire confidence that at least this case is now better understood in its particularity. Case studies can contribute to a more nuanced picture, if not shake of conventional understanding more fundamentally, and may well suggest new research areas. And next, key question. This key question is, what can be learned of the reading of IELLE literature from this case? And then, anticipated outcome. Will depend on this individual case and the research knowledge of it, but the principle remains that there will always be anticipated outcomes, and it is good to make them as explicit as possible from the outset. And next, how to collect data. Triangulation is needed for qualitative depth and multi-perspectival sensitivity of understanding. For example, can be complemented by interviews, observation, examination of written text, including the subject reading logs or diaries, and so on. And then analysis. A strong case for developing findings in collaboration with others, including the subject of the study. This data needs to be shaped into a coherent and convincing account. The next is time allocation. A natural close is reached is much qualitative research. Development does not stop when the research leaves. And then research needed. See notes on observation, interviews, and analysis of text and documents. Okay, the project 4 is difficulties in reading literature in a second language. Protocol study. Number 1 is purpose. At a local and individual level, problems can be identified and pointed to or strategies developed. More generally, shared difficulty can be expected to emerge across readers and student population, which can inform teaching decisions regarding selection of materials, sequencing, and appropriate or helpful activities. The next is key question. The key question is, what difficulties do second language readers of literature experience with literary text? And next is anticipated outcome. At the higher level, difficulties may be more cognitive, inferential, or cultural, probably extending to attitudes to literature reading or a relative lack of experience. And next, how to collect data. The key is a good recording with some contextual notes to help you interpret the recording. You need a quiet room with no interruptions. One technique you often reported as successful is to ask subject to read a text silently, underline any words or passage they feel uncertain about, and then discuss this with the researchers. And then data collection. Try to use different texts and students to read the investigation if possible, though analysis will tend to be more qualitative and perhaps longitudinal. And then is analysis. Develop codings to enable analysis of individual transcript and comparison across tab scripts. The next is time allocation. Allow several hours to transcribe 10 or 15 minutes or transcript. Don't go on collecting tabs and thinking you will do the transcription later. And then research needed. Tab recorder, microphone, transcribing device,
a memory stick device, backup copies, and clearly printed text and interaction, no distraction, and appropriate room. And next, project 5 is attitudes to literature. Number one is purpose. Focuses on student and attitudes, but of course another useful project would to be examining and perhaps compare teacher beliefs and attitude towards literature. The purpose is promote a more cooperative and committed classroom environment. And next, a K question. Question first is, do my students like literature? Number 2, what kinds of literature do they like? And number 3, do they believe literature will help them achieve their learning goals? Okay, the next is anticipated outcome. Students are likely to be unconvinced and thoughts about communicative and oral relevance likely. And next, how to collect data. Questionnaire or possibly follow-up can to be interviews and discussion as well. And then data collection. Design of a questionnaire should anticipate the case and usefulness of collecting and analyzing data. The next, analysis. It is possible to lose sight of original research question and interest in over-analyzing data or collecting too much detailed data, especially with the help of some statistical packages and software now readily available for use on PC. Next is time allocation. Its time is start by allowing 100 hours. Next is resources needed. Clear printing and copying facilities, word processing, ideally software, and collect to check your counting and analysis. Okay, the last project is project 6. It's literature as a social practice. Ethnography. Number 1 is purpose. The purpose is in other people with wider lives and interest learning to participate in their own ways in new groups and alliances of people who habitually speak and think in relatively unfamiliar ways. And then, K question. The key question of this project is, what is being learned in the large educational sense by this reader or this group in reading this book or that literary text? The next is anticipated outcome. Qualitative research tries not to anticipate outcomes too closely, though expectation or certain interests are likely to prompt or pre-exist the study. The next is how to collect data. Triangulation will be the key along with good access to data and an insider understanding of the research situation. Journals, diaries, or interviews can be valuable, or focus groups and anything that gets the research a better understanding. Okay, the next is data collection. The object is data, not that this can include photos or other non-linguistic artifacts. The next, analysis. Analysis is necessarily primarily qualitative and will take the form of a convincing narrative of the situation. The next is time allocation. It takes time but will also be relatively natural to write and reflect on a situation so close to you and to discuss it with others. And next, research needed. Indians, parts of paper and a pencil, and possibly a frying pan too. Okay, that is a video material from me and my friends. Thanks for your watching. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
I'm an icon, man. And my girl about a 10. I should fuck her in the Benz.